The year was 1944, and the world was embroiled in the chaos of World War II. The temperature on this particular day, June 6th, was a chilly 55 degrees Fahrenheit, with a gentle mist rolling in off the English Channel. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the sweet scent of blooming wildflowers and the distant smell of salt water. The sky above was a deep shade of gray, with clouds that seemed to stretch on forever, like an endless canvas of cotton balls. In the early morning hours, the sound of rumbling engines and crunching gravel filled the air as a fleet of Allied ships made their way through the choppy waters of the Channel. The ships, a mix of American, British, and Canadian vessels, were carrying the brave men of the Allied forces, who were about to embark on one of the most pivotal battles in history. The sound of seagulls filled the air, their cries echoing across the water as they swooped and dived in search of food. On board the ships, the soldiers were busy preparing for the battle ahead. They were armed with an array of weapons, including the trusty M1 Garand rifle, the M1911 pistol, and the M3 submachine gun. The M1 Garand, with its distinctive M-block clip system, was a favorite among the soldiers, who appreciated its reliability and firepower. The M1911 pistol, with its sleek design and powerful .45 ACP rounds, was a trusted sidearm, while the M3 submachine gun, also known as the grease gun, was a versatile and deadly addition to the soldiers' arsenal. As the ships approached the Normandy coast, the soldiers could see the outline of the beach, codenamed Omaha Beach, looming in the distance. The beach was a stretch of sandy shoreline, lined with steep cliffs and rocky outcroppings, and was defended by a series of fortified German positions, including machine gun nests, mortar pits, and artillery emplacements. The soldiers knew that they would have to fight their way up the beach through a maelstrom of bullets and bombs in order to secure a foothold on the continent. The German defenders, stationed in their fortified positions, were armed with a range of deadly weapons, including the Maschinengewehr 42 (MG42) machine gun, the Karabiner 98K rifle, and the Panzerfaust anti-tank rocket. The MG42, with its blistering rate of fire and distinctive sound, was a feared opponent, capable of laying down a withering field of fire that could cut down even the most determined attackers. The Karabiner 98K, with its long barrel and powerful 7.92 mm rounds, was a trusted sniper rifle, while the Panzerfaust, with its explosive warhead and simple design, was a deadly anti-tank weapon. As the Allied ships approached the shore, the soldiers could feel the tension building. They knew that they were about to embark on a desperate and bloody battle, one that would determine the course of the war and the fate of the world. The sound of artillery fire and machine gun bursts filled the air, growing louder with each passing moment, as the German NS opened fire on the approaching ships. The first wave of Allied troops, consisting of soldiers from the 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions, climbed down the cargo nets and into the landing craft, their hearts racing with anticipation and fear. The landing craft, designated as Landing Craft Infantry (LCI), were sturdy vessels, designed to carry the soldiers through the choppy waters and deposit them safely on the beach. The LCIs were equipped with a range of armaments, including .50 caliber machine guns and 20 mm anti-aircraft guns, which would provide covering fire for the soldiers as they made their way ashore. As the LCIs approached the shore, the soldiers could see the chaos and destruction that lay before them. The beach was a scene of utter devastation, with bodies strewn about, and wreckage from destroyed ships and vehicles littering the sand. The air was thick, with the smell of smoke and cordite, and the sound of gunfire and explosions filled the air. The soldiers knew that they had to move quickly, to secure a foothold on the beach, and begin the long and bloody process of pushing the Germans back. The soldiers, weighed down by their heavy packs and equipment, waded through the waist-deep water, their eyes fixed on the beach ahead. They were a mix of seasoned veterans and green recruits, all united in their determination to complete their mission and secure a victory for the Allies. As they emerged from the water, they were greeted by a hail of bullets and shells. It tore through the air and ripped into the sand, sending geysers of water and debris flying in all directions. The sound of gunfire was deafening, a cacophony of machine guns, rifles, and artillery that seemed to come from all directions at once. The soldiers hit the sand, seeking cover behind any available obstacle, as they returned fire with their own weapons. The M1 Garands and M1911 pistols cracked and boomed, sending .3006 and .45 ACP rounds hurtling toward the German positions, while the M3 submachine guns chattered and spat, laying down a withering field of fire that cut through the German defenses. The battle was on, and the fate of the world hung in the balance. The soldiers knew that they had to fight with every ounce of strength they possessed to overcome the formidable German defenses and secure a foothold on the continent. The outcome was far from certain, but one thing was clear. Only one side could emerge victorious, and the soldiers were determined to make sure that it was them. The fight for Omaha Beach had begun, and it would be a battle for the ages, a clash of steel and fire that would determine the course of history. As the battle commenced, the Allied forces, comprising of American, British, and Canadian troops, employed a multifaceted tactical approach to outmaneuver the enemy. The initial thrust was led by the 1st Infantry Division, which advanced in a staggered formation, with the 1st Battalion on the left flank, the 2nd Battalion in the centre, and the 3rd Battalion on the right flank. The battalions were further subdivided into companies, with each company consisting of 4 platoons, numbered 1st to 4th. The platoons were arrayed in a checkerboard pattern, allowing for maximum firepower and flexibility. The 1st Battalion, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel James, spearheaded the assault, with the 1st and 2nd platoons advancing in a direct line, while the 3rd and 4th platoons provided supporting fire from the flanks. The 2nd Battalion, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Williams, followed closely behind, with its 1st and 2nd platoons moving in a wide arc to the left, attempting to outflank the enemy's right wing. Meanwhile, the 3rd Battalion, led by Lieutenant Colonel Thompson, held back, adopting a defensive posture to safeguard the division's right flank and rear. As the 1st Infantry Division pushed forward, the enemy forces, consisting of seasoned German troops, responded with a withering barrage of artillery and small arms fire. The Allies, anticipating this reaction, had preemptively laid down a smokescreen to obscure their advance, utilizing a combination of smoke bombs and artillery-delivered smoke shells. The smoke, drifting lazily across the battlefield, effectively masked the Allied troop movements, allowing them to close the distance to the enemy lines without sustaining excessive casualties. The 1st Battalion, now within 500 yards of the enemy's forward positions, paused momentarily to regroup and reassess the situation. The 1st and 2nd platoons, having taken moderate casualties, were reinforced by the 3rd and 4th platoons, which had been held in reserve. The battalion's machine gun section, comprising of 6 M1919 Browning machine guns, was deployed to provide suppressive fire, pinning down the enemy and allowing the infantry to advance. Meanwhile, the 2nd Battalion, having successfully outflanked the enemy's right wing, began to apply pressure on the German troops from the rear. The 1st and 2nd platoons, supported by a section of Sherman tanks, rolled up the enemy's flank, exploiting the weak point in the German line. The tanks, moving in tandem with the infantry, provided close supporting fire, blasting aside enemy strongpoints and clearing a path for the troops to follow. As the battle raged on, the 3rd Battalion, still holding back in reserve, was ordered to advance and link up with the 1st and 2nd Battalions. The 3rd Battalion's 1st and 2nd platoons moved forward in a rapid bound, covering 200 yards of open ground in a matter of minutes. The platoons, upon reaching the midpoint between the 1st and 2nd Battalions, established a firm base of fire, laying down a hail of bullets to keep the enemy's heads down. With all 3 battalions now engaged, the Allied forces continued to apply relentless pressure on the enemy, gradually pushing them back. The Germans, however, refused to yield, and their defensive lines remained stubbornly intact. The Allied commanders, aware of the enemy's tenacity, opted to introduce additional firepower into the fray, calling upon the division's artillery assets to deliver a concentrated barrage on the German positions. The artillery, comprising of 105mm and 155mm howitzers, as well as 8-inch guns, unleashed a devastating bombardment, raining down high explosive shells on the enemy's trenches and strongpoints. The barrage, timed to coincide with the infantry's advance, effectively shattered the German defenses, creating breaches in the line that the Allied troops could exploit. The infantry, sensing the enemy's weakened state, surged forward with renewed vigor, pouring through the gaps in the German line and commencing a mopping-up operation to eliminate any remaining pockets of resistance. As the battle entered its final stages, the Allied forces, having breached the enemy's defensive perimeter, began to push deep into the German rear, seeking to disrupt their command and control structures. The 1st and 2nd Battalions, now operating in tandem, swept forward, overrunning enemy headquarters, artillery positions, and supply depots. The 3rd Battalion, maintaining its reserve role, stood ready to respond to any counterattacks, providing a bulwark against potential German countermeasures. With the enemy's defenses crumbling, the Allied commanders, cognizant of the battle's shifting dynamics, began to reassess their tactical objectives. The initial goal of securing a foothold on the continent had given way to a more ambitious aim: the complete destruction of the enemy's forces and the capture of key terrain features. The Allied troops, energized by their successes, pressed on, driven by a renewed sense of purpose and a determination to bring the battle to a swift and decisive conclusion. As the Allied forces pushed forward, they were met with a maelstrom of firepower from the German defenses. The 88mm flak guns, with their distinctive cruciform shape and menacing barrels, belched forth a torrent of high-velocity rounds that shredded the air and splintered the earth. The report of these guns was like a crack of thunder, shaking the very foundations of the ground as they hurled their 9.5-kilogram projectiles at speeds of up to 820 meters per second. The trajectory of these shells was eerily flat, allowing them to slice through the Allied ranks with pinpoint accuracy, leaving behind trails of devastation and chaos in their wake. Meanwhile, the German MG-42 machine guns, with their distinctive ripping sound, laid down a withering field of fire that seemed to scythe through the Allied troops like a reaper's blade. These guns, with their 1,200 round per minute rate of fire, were the epitome of German engineering, capable of delivering a sustained and deadly volume of firepower that seemed almost impossible to suppress. The 7.92mm rounds they spat forth were like a hail of razor-sharp needles, piercing flesh and armor with equal ease, and leaving behind a trail of shattered bodies and shattered dreams. As the battle raged on, the Allies found themselves facing a logistical nightmare of epic proportions. The supply chains, already strained to the breaking point, were now on the verge of collapse. The roads, clogged with the wreckage of destroyed vehicles and the detritus of war, were becoming increasingly impassable, making it difficult for the Allies to bring up fresh troops, ammunition, and equipment to the front lines. The few remaining bridges, precarious and vulnerable to German artillery fire, were the only lifelines that connected the Allied forces to their rear echelons, and the loss of these bridges would spell disaster for the entire operation. In the midst of this chaos, the Allied command structure was struggling to maintain a semblance of order. The radio networks, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of traffic, were on the verge of collapse, making it difficult for commanders to coordinate their efforts and respond to the rapidly shifting situation on the ground. The situation was further complicated by the fact that many of the Allied units were now operating in a state of semi-autonomy, with their commanders forced to make life-or-death decisions based on incomplete and often conflicting information. As the battle reached its crescendo, the very fabric of reality seemed to be tearing apart. The air was filled with the acrid smell of smoke and cordite, and the earth shook beneath the feet of the combatants as the guns and artillery pieces continued to pound away. The sky above was a deep, foreboding gray, with clouds that seemed to boil and churn like a living thing, as if the very heavens themselves were being torn asunder by the conflict below. In the midst of this maelstrom, individual soldiers were forced to confront the ultimate chaos of war. The rational, ordered world they had once known was now nothing more than a distant memory, replaced by a surreal landscape of destruction and death. The rules of civilized society, once thought to be inviolable, were now nothing more than a distant memory, as soldiers on both sides were forced to confront the primal, atavistic impulses that lay at the heart of human nature. As the battle raged on, the distinction between friend and foe began to blur, and the soldiers found themselves facing a daunting and primal fear, the fear of the unknown. The Germans, with their sinister helmets and menacing armor, seemed like specters from another world, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light as they pressed home their attack. The Allies, meanwhile, were forced to confront the dark recesses of their own psyche as they struggled to come to terms with the sheer brutality and intensity of the conflict. In this surreal landscape, the laws of physics seemed to bend and warp, as if the very rules of reality were being rewritten before the eyes of the combatants. Time itself seemed to slow down, as if the clockwork of the universe had been wound down to a crawl, and the soldiers found themselves trapped in a never-ending nightmare of blood and chaos. The sounds of war, once a distant rumble, were now a cacophonous roar that filled the ears and shook the very foundations of the soul. And yet, despite the chaos and the destruction, despite the fear and the uncertainty, the soldiers on both sides found themselves bound together by a common thread: the thread of humanity. In the midst of this maelstrom, they found themselves confronting the ultimate question: what does it mean to be human? Is it the capacity for love and compassion? Or is it the ability to endure suffering and hardship? Is it the pursuit of honor and glory? Or is it the simple, primal urge to survive? As the battle raged on, these questions hung in the air, unanswered and unanswerable, as the soldiers on both sides struggled to come to terms with the ultimate chaos of war. The outcome of the battle was far from certain, and the fate of the world hung in the balance, as the combatants stumbled forward, blindly, into the unknown. The future was a black hole, a void that seemed to stretch out before them like an endless abyss, and the only thing that was certain was that nothing would ever be the same again. As the cacophony of war reached a deafening crescendo, the once pristine landscape transformed into a twisted, nightmarish realm, where the very fabric of reality seemed to unravel. The air was heavy, with the acrid stench of smoke, sweat, and blood, a noxious miasma that clung to every surface like a malignant entity. The earth trembled beneath the feet of the combatants, as if the land itself was being torn asunder by the unremitting fury of the battle. Every second was a lifetime, a compressed eternity of chaos and confusion, where the boundaries between life and death were blurred beyond recognition. The soldiers on both sides were reduced to mere automatons, driven by a primal urge to survive, to emerge victorious from the vortex of carnage that had consumed them all. Their eyes were vacant, their souls trapped in a realm of unrelenting terror, as they mechanically fired their weapons, reloaded, and fired again, their actions dictated by a maddening cycle of kill or be killed. The artillery fire had intensified, the big guns thundering out a relentless barrage that shook the foundations of the earth. The shells screamed through the air, their trajectory marked by a trail of smoke and flames, as they crashed into the ground with a deafening roar, sending shrapnel and debris flying in all directions. The infantry cowered in their foxholes, their bodies tense with anticipation, as they waited for the inevitable, their fingers clenched around their rifles like lifelines. To the north, a company of tanks rumbled forward, their treads screeching in protest as they climbed over the rubble-strewn terrain. The tanks were behemoths, their armored hides pockmarked with scars, their guns blazing with a fierce intensity that illuminated the darkening landscape. The enemy lines wavered, the defenders stumbling backward in disarray, as the tanks pushed forward with an unstoppable momentum, their path marked by a trail of crushed bodies and shattered equipment. The enemy command center, a labyrinthine complex of bunkers and tunnels, was the focal point of the battle, the key to unlocking the entire defensive network. A team of elite commandos, handpicked for their skills and bravery, had been tasked with infiltrating the complex, their mission to dismantle the enemy's command structure and create chaos in the ranks. The commandos moved with a ghostly stealth, their blackened faces blending into the shadows, as they navigated the treacherous maze of tunnels and corridors. Every step was a calculated risk, every decision a potentially fatal gamble. The commandos knew that they were expendable, that their lives were mere pawns in a much larger game. But they pressed on, driven by a fierce dedication to their mission. They encountered pockets of resistance, small groups of fanatical defenders who fought with a suicidal ferocity. But the commandos were undaunted, their training and experience allowing them to overcome each obstacle with a ruthless efficiency. As the battle raged on, the noise and chaos reached a fever pitch. The combatants on both sides pushed to the limits of human endurance. The landscape was a scene from a nightmare, a twisted realm of fire and smoke, where the rules of reality no longer applied. The soldiers were mere specters, their bodies worn down by the ceaseless fighting, their minds numb with the shock of it all. They stumbled forward, their eyes vacant, their souls trapped in a realm of unrelenting horror, as the battle consumed them all, a raging behemoth that would not be satiated until it had claimed every last life. In this maelstrom of chaos, a young soldier, barely out of his teens, found himself lost and alone, separated from his unit in the turmoil of the battle. He wandered through the desolate landscape, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of his comrades, but there was nothing, only the endless expanse of smoke and flames. He stumbled forward, his legs trembling with fatigue, his heart heavy with the weight of his own mortality. He knew that he was just a tiny cog in a much larger machine, a mere pawn in a game of war that would decide the fate of nations. And yet, even in the midst of this chaos, there was a strange, perverse beauty to it all, a symphony of destruction that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. The flames danced across the landscape, a kaleidoscope of colors that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The smoke curled and eddied, a serpentine mist that wrapped itself around the combatants, obscuring their vision and hiding their enemies. The noise was a living thing, a palpable entity that throbbed and pulsed with an energy all its own, a rhythm that seemed to match the beat of the soldier's heart. In this strange, surreal world, the young soldier found a moment of clarity, a fleeting glimpse of understanding that transcended the chaos and the carnage. He saw the battle for what it was, a senseless, brutal struggle that would leave only death and destruction in its wake. He saw the futility of it all, the waste and the horror, and in that moment he knew that he would never be the same again. The battle had changed him, had seared itself into his soul like a branding iron, leaving a scar that would never fully heal. As the battle raged on, the young soldier stumbled forward, his eyes fixed on some point in the distance, his heart heavy with the weight of his own mortality. He knew that he would never escape the memories of this day, that they would haunt him for the rest of his life, a constant reminder of the horrors that he had witnessed. And yet, even in the midst of this chaos, he found a strange, perverse sense of purpose, a determination to survive, to emerge from this furnace of fire and steel with his soul intact. He would carry the scars of this battle with him forever, a constant reminder of the horrors that he had faced. But he would also carry a newfound appreciation for life, a sense of wonder and awe that would stay with him for the rest of his days. The landscape was forever changed, as if the very fabric of reality had been torn apart by the cataclysmic event that had just transpired. The once blue skies were now a deep, foreboding gray, with clouds that seemed to swirl in every direction, as if searching for a way to escape the devastation below. The air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke, ash, and the sweet, sickly scent of death. The ground itself was scorched and blackened, as if the earth had been seared by an unforgiving hand. As the survivors stumbled through the ruins, they were met with a scene of unmitigated horror. Buildings lay in ruins, their steel beams twisted and tangled like a madman's sculpture. The streets were littered with the debris of what once was, the remnants of lives torn apart by the brutal hand of war. The sounds of screams, wails, and pleas for help filled the air, a haunting melody that seemed to echo through the desolate landscape. The casualty reports began to filter in, each one a heartbreaking testament to the brutality of the conflict. The numbers were staggering, with hundreds, perhaps even thousands, killed or injured in the initial blast. The medical teams worked tirelessly, their faces etched with exhaustion and despair, as they struggled to tend to the countless wounded. The hospitals were quickly overwhelmed, with makeshift facilities springing up in an effort to cope with the sheer scale of the disaster. Amidst the chaos and destruction, individual stories of survival began to emerge. A young woman, no more than 20 years old, was pulled from the rubble, her legs badly injured, but her spirit unbroken. She had been hiding in a basement with her family when the blast hit, and had somehow managed to see all out, despite the wreckage that had once been her home. As she was carried to safety, she clutched a small, blood-stained photograph of her loved ones, her eyes welling up with tears as she whispered their names. A group of soldiers, who had been on patrol when the disaster struck, stumbled back to their base, their faces blackened with soot, their eyes red-rimmed from the smoke. They were met with a mixture of relief and despair, as their comrades rushed to tend to their wounds, and to learn of the fate of those who had not returned. One of the soldiers, a grizzled veteran, was seen walking away from the group, his eyes fixed on some point in the distance, his face a mask of grief. He had lost his best friend, his brother in arms, in the blast, and the weight of that loss was crushing him. As the day wore on, the full extent of the destruction became clearer. Entire neighborhoods had been reduced to rubble, with streets that were once lined with shops, restaurants, and homes, now nothing more than a memory. The city's infrastructure was in shambles, with power lines down, water mains ruptured, and communication networks destroyed. The authorities struggled to cope with the crisis, as they worked to establish order and to provide aid to those in need. The survivors, meanwhile, were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. They wandered the streets, dazed and confused, searching for loved ones, and trying to make sense of the senseless destruction that inundated them. Some were seen clutching what little they had managed to salvage from their homes, a few precious belongings that now seemed insignificant in the face of such overwhelming loss. Others simply sat, shell-shocked and silent, their eyes fixed on the ground, as if unable to comprehend the scale of the devastation. As night began to fall, the city was plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the fires that still burned, and the faint glow of emergency generators. The survivors huddled together, seeking comfort in each other's company as they waited for the dawn to come. They knew that the road ahead would be long and hard, but they also knew that they had to keep moving, to keep pushing forward, no matter what lay in store. The world watched, aghast, as the news of the disaster spread, and the true extent of the destruction became clear. Leaders from around the globe issued statements, condemning the attack and offering their support to the stricken city. But for those on the ground, the words of condolence rang hollow, as they struggled to come to terms with the sheer scale of their loss. They knew that they would never be the same again, that their city, their lives, and their world had been forever changed by the catastrophic event that had struck, without warning, on that fateful day. The days that followed were a blur of activity as the rescue efforts continued and the rebuilding process began. The city was a vast, open wound, and it would take time, effort, and resources to heal. The survivors, meanwhile, were left to pick up the pieces, to mourn their dead, and to try to find a way to move forward, in a world that seemed to have been turned upside down. They knew that they would never forget the day that their city was torn apart and their lives were changed forever. As the search for survivors continued, the death toll continued to rise, and the true extent of the destruction became clearer. The city's infrastructure was in shambles, and it would take years, perhaps even decades, to rebuild. The survivors, meanwhile, were left to come to terms with their new reality, and to try to find a way to move forward, in a world that seemed to have been forever changed. They knew that they would never be the same again, that their city, their lives, and their world had been altered in ways that they could hardly begin to comprehend. The weeks turned into months, and the months turned into years, but the memory of that fateful day never faded. The survivors, and the families of those who had been lost, would always remember the day that their city was torn apart, and their lives were changed forever. They would always remember the sounds of screams, the smell of smoke, and the feeling of helplessness that had gripped them as they watched, in horror, as their world was destroyed. And they would always remember the bravery, the resilience, and the determination that had defined them in the face of such overwhelming adversity. The aftermath of the conflict had far-reaching consequences, reshaping the global landscape and leaving an indelible mark on the world. The war had unleashed a maelstrom of geopolitical upheaval, as nations struggled to come to terms with the new reality. The balance of power had shifted irrevocably, with some nations emerging stronger and more resilient, while others were left to pick up the pieces and rebuild. In the years that followed, the world witnessed a proliferation of international organizations and treaties, aimed at preventing future conflicts and promoting global cooperation. The United Nations, born out of the ashes of the war, played a crucial role in maintaining peace and stability, providing a forum for nations to engage in dialogue and resolve their differences through diplomacy. The European Union, established in the aftermath of the war, sought to promote economic and political integration, fostering a sense of shared identity and purpose among its member states. However, the legacy of the war was not limited to the realm of international relations. It also had a profound impact on the social and cultural fabric of nations, as people struggled to come to terms with the trauma and devastation they had experienced. The war had brought about a profound sense of disillusionment, as the old certainties and verities were challenged and dismantled. In the aftermath, there was a sense of confusion and disorientation, as individuals and communities sought to find their place in a world that seemed to have been turned upside down. The war also had a profound impact on the arts, as writers, artists, and musicians sought to capture the essence of the experience and convey the emotions and thoughts that it had evoked. The literature of the period is characterized by a sense of bleakness and desolation, as authors such as Hemingway and Camus grappled with the existential implications of the war. The art of the period is marked by a sense of fragmentation and disillusionment, as artists such as Picasso and Dalí sought to convey the chaos and disorder that the war had unleashed. In the decades that followed, the world witnessed a series of social and cultural revolutions, as people sought to create a new and better world, free from the injustices and inequalities of the past. The civil rights movement in the United States, the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, and the feminist movement in Europe and North America were all part of a broader struggle for human rights and dignity. The war had shown that the old order was not inviolable, and that change was possible, even in the face of overwhelming opposition. As we look back on the war, it is clear that its legacy is complex and multifaceted. It was a conflict that was fought on many levels, from the trenches of the battlefield to the hearts and minds of individuals. It was a conflict that was driven by a complex array of motivations and interests, from the pursuit of power and resources to the defense of freedom and democracy. And it was a conflict that had far-reaching consequences, shaping the course of history and leaving an indelible mark on the world. As we reflect on the war, we are reminded of the power of human agency and the importance of individual actions. We are reminded that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, individuals can make a difference, and that collective action can lead to profound and lasting change. And we are reminded that the study of history is not just about understanding the past, but about learning from it and using those lessons to build a better future. As the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star." The war was a chaotic and devastating event, but it also gave birth to a new world, a world that is still evolving and unfolding today. As we look to the future, we would do well to remember the lessons of the past and to approach the challenges that lie ahead with courage, compassion, and wisdom. If you would like to learn more about the history of the war and its legacy, I invite you to subscribe to our channel, where we will be exploring a wide range of topics related to military history, from the ancient world to the present day. Our goal is to provide in-depth analysis and insightful commentary, and to help our viewers gain a deeper understanding of the complex and often misunderstood world of military history. So please, subscribe now and join us on this journey of discovery and exploration. Continued exploration of the complexities and nuances of military history. Subscribe to our channel for more in-depth analysis, thought-provoking commentary, and insightful discussions on the most significant conflicts and events in human history. Together, let us seek to understand the intricacies of the past and work towards a more informed, compassionate, and peaceful world. By doing so, we can honor the memories of those who have served and sacrificed, while promoting a more harmonious and cooperative global community.